it wasn't entertaining the first time, and it wasn't entertaining the 80th time that we talked about it today. Anyway, so that's why I was laughing. But
consequently, you didn't snore yourself awake during this conversation, did you?
No, I didn't. Thank God. So the Career Challenges Podcast, a collection of stories about overcoming professional hurdles and learning lessons the hard way. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Kyle Werkerly, certified ghostwriter. The Career Challenges Podcast. This is a special episode, not just because I think this is episode 14 or 15, if I'm not mistaken. Again, math is not my strong suit. I've been saying that in every episode. Maybe I'll get it down one of these days. Anyway, this is a special episode because I have a returning guest, my very first returning guest, and that is Brian Benavides. So, Brian, welcome back.
Thanks. I appreciate it. We seem to be making this a habit.
That's good. I mean, better to have entertaining conversation with somebody you know than repeated dull conversation.
That's for sure. Yeah, I guess I'm already kind of a proven thing, so you may as well just feature me every now and then, right?
Maybe. But the reason why I'm laughing is just something earlier that happened in my day. Just somebody that I work with on a regular basis, and the conversation just always seems to be the same thing, and it wasn't entertaining the first time, and it wasn't entertaining the 80th time that we talked about it today. Anyway, so that's why I was laughing. But
consequently, you didn't snore yourself awake during this conversation, did you?
No, I didn't. Thank God. So Brian, you've been on the show before, but just in case for my listeners who haven't listened to that particular episode, or maybe they have and they can't quite place your voice or your name, just give us a quick refresher on who you are and what you do.
Well, obviously the name is Brian Benavides. I am the president and CEO of Omega Strategic Consulting, which focuses on general business consulting and healthcare consulting. Mm-hmm. It's mainly geared towards the operations in business and the human behavior and organizational behavior behind things.
Awesome. That's great, because I remember the first time we talked about assessing behavioral strength, and I was a skeptic. I'm going to be honest. I hated those personality tests, but you actually won me over. So I'm hoping that people hearing me say that will want to go back and listen to that episode and, of course, see the light. And maybe not the light, but at least, be more open-minded to personality tests and quizzes of that nature. But you consult businesses specifically in the healthcare industry with their operations and things of that nature. When I hear that, I just automatically assume, that's because those kind of businesses, there's so much going on. There's so much legislature. They're very complex. Is that true? Is that business, as specifically healthcare? I mean, all businesses you could argue are complex, but specifically healthcare, is that just such a mind-numbingly complex industry that you can't go through with it without a consultant?
It's funny to me because it's really not. I mean, it's an organization just like any other. There are small variable differences really between any type of organization. I think really what it comes down to is people tend to overcomplicate things. And that's really where a lot of that complexity seems to stem from. Business is pretty simple. It's a general overview. I mean, it's really one side is increase and diversify revenues, and the other side is decrease and control your expenses. If you're paying attention to those two, more than likely you're going to be on top of the health of your organization. Obviously, it can, gets a lot more macular from there, but those two general points of rule, tend to serve me very well.
All right. So if somebody were, that first one you mentioned, increase and diversify revenues, that in and of itself to me sounds complicated. To diversify, meaning you've got to do more than one thing at a time. What are your suggestions, strategies, or even stories of how you've been able to keep that simple in a business?
Well, depending on the type of organization. So, I mean, general business, you can have an electrical firm, for example, a residential service company, You're out there just doing electrical things, changing out electrical services, boxes, switches, plugs, all types of things. A natural diversification that I actually took and implemented in another organization was surge protection.
Mm-hmm.
In that surge protection, it was a very small company. When I got it, I only had 3 technicians. Just in general service work, we were doing the production of a 7-man shop for these similar organizations for franchising. And just with the introduction and the focus on surge protection, we did over $250,000 in that service line alone, and that wasn't even a full fiscal year of production.
Mm-hmm.
So that should give somebody some kind of I guess understanding of what diversifying things can do, because you do this one thing or this group of things very, very well, but then you try and find similar ancillary resources or revenue streams to complement those things. And that's really what I mean by diversification in healthcare. It's take an OB-GYN office, for example. An OB-GYN office that doesn't have their own sonographer there doing ultrasounds all day long, to me, that's an operational failure. It's just a natural diversification for that business, as certainly an ancillary revenue stream. And it's something that's going to be a consistent production. And overall, it's a benefit to the patients, much like surge protection is a benefit to those consumers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when both times my wife and I were pregnant, every time we went to go to the ultrasound, it was next door to her OB-GYN, but that lady, it was just one right after the next. In and out all day. These pregnant women coming in, getting their ultrasounds done. So I definitely see how that helps their practice. So are there any other, I guess, suggestions like that? Not just specifically for OB-GYN, because that seems like an obvious example, but is there any others?
Yeah, there's a multitude of other things that they could diversify into. If they're doing general gynecology, which usually OB-GYN does OB and gynecology both. So a natural diversification there is urogynecology, which is basically like female urology. I was very successful at taking an OB-GYN organization and transitioning that with a diversification into urogynecology. And I actually took that surgeon in that urogynecology specialty. And certainly in Texas, he was the highest producing surgeon for his specialty, and possibly the United States.
Wow. So is that just something that a lot of those kind of practices, they don't even think about? It doesn't even cross their mind?
Well, it might cross their mind, but the vast majority of them operationally, have challenges. I've come across very, very few. I can count on one hand and probably still have most of my fingers left over how many I've come into contact with that are operationally running very well. I think where a lot of people get, people may recognize something like that, a natural diversification, but where they really get in their own way is they may not have built a solid base. They may not be operationally sound. Mm-hmm. And they may try and take on a diversification and then have that fail, because it winds up being a drain on resources. They don't quite do it the right way. There's not enough patient base to feed that subspecialty. There's a number of reasons that it could fail. But ultimately it comes back to, it's just like building a house. If you have a very shaky, cracked foundation, an instability in the foundation, anything you build on top of it is going to, reflect those failures.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So we'll come back to that in a second, but I wanted to ask another question because you mentioned decreasing and control expenses. How do they do that?
Well, it's difficult to decrease or control a lot of some of your expenses. We'll say like general overhead, rent, things like that. You have an expectation that those things are going to go up, between 3% and 6% every year. So a lot of the things that they can control or they can do is renegotiate vendor agreements. Every organization I've ever been in contact with, healthcare or other, usually has these very long-standing agreements with various vendors, whether it's waste management or, I mean, it could be as simple as, Xerox copiers all over the office, and
Yeah.
they've never renegotiated them. And, through 10 or 20 years of operations, they've had these incremental increases. And, I'll give you an example. I came into one organization and I got a hold of all their vendor agreements, and I started going through, and within the first few months, I had already cut almost $250,000 out of their operating budget, just renegotiating vendor agreements.
Wow. So how do you suggest they stay on top of that? Do they need to do that quarterly to reassess their vendor agreements, or maybe every 6 months, or is it better just to do it annually?
I would certainly say at least have a thumbprint on it annually. You want to know when there's an expectation of, these overages, that everybody's going to have them. And depending on the time frame for renegotiating these, they're all going to hit at different times. So I think an annual review of it is probably a prudent practice. But, you may not choose to renegotiate all of them until, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, when they start to get to an expiration date or a renewal date.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point. So then I wanted that to kind of domino into what we were talking about earlier, how to diversify your revenue. Like you had mentioned, having a full-time sonographer. Am I saying that right?
Yes, correct. Ultrasound.
Yeah, ultrasound technician. And then, maybe the urologist, they're on call as well. So how can you diversify, bringing in, say, that sonographer and that urologist, without really incurring a lot more expenses? Because sometimes it just may not be financially feasible for them to bring on that second specialist, because the expenses that come with them would just be way too much.
And you're right. I mean, there's multiple different things that you can do. The organization itself can take on and subcontract those specialties, mm-hmm. and, do the billing and collections for them, particularly if they're operationally sound in billing and collections. You really want your organization doing that. And then you just pay them, like sonographers, you pay them per scan. You pre-negotiate a rate that they're happy with and you're happy with, and, keeps your margins in line for that ancillary service. And, all the world is right. Same thing with, you're talking about these other, diversifications like the urogynecologist and things like that. It's really the same thing. Mm-hmm. You have a strategic alliance with that provider, whether they're a part of your group or not, really doesn't make a difference, because you still have the added benefit of utilization of their services, particularly if they're very good or they're regarded as the best in their subspecialty. Because ultimately what you want is, you want the diversification in these things, but you also want the best resource you can have, because, ultimately they're all consumers, just like we are. We all go to the doctor. The same way that we may all, contract electrical services. So, having somebody that, that is purported to be the best at what they do, is certainly a benefit. And when somebody refers somebody, they usually don't refer anybody that sucks. So,
yeah,
you're really hoping that you get the best of that specialty.
Yeah. Well, I remember having a conversation about that with real estate agents, because, when we're buying a house, you never say, well, go with mine. I hate him, but, it's my real estate agent. It's like, no, you always want to refer yours, because they've obviously done you a good job in getting your house. And you don't say, well, don't go with my guy, he sucks.
Yeah.
You're going to refer somebody you like. And so that also lends credence to that person, because somebody likes them enough to refer them. So at least one person out there likes this real estate agent or this healthcare specialist. So that's always good.
Yeah, it's definitely good, particularly in a surgeon, that they are, medically and ethically sound.
Yeah. What was it that I think it was Hot Shots. There's that they're parroting the whole Top Gun thing, and this one of the pilots has this horrible wreck, and then they're wheeling him into the ER, and they're asking, well, is he going to live, doctor? And the doctor's like, I don't know, I'm not a good doctor. I have really low self-esteem here.
Yeah,
it's like so out of the order, because it's a parody. Of course, they're really running with it. But if that were to happen in real life, I think everything would just stop, And they'd be
Oh
like,
yeah, I would
no.
assume there would be walkouts. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's no
like,
doubt that I would get up off the gurney and leave.
yeah, and the person carrying, or either the power of attorney, whoever has that authority, would stop and say, I don't care if this person is on the edge of death. You're going to get me somebody who believes that they can do this.
That's right. That's right.
Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Visit careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. And while you're there, listen to all available episodes and subscribe through Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. More outlets are coming soon. The Career Challenges podcast is produced by me, Kyle Weckerly, and I'm a certified ghostwriter. A little bit more about that. I work almost exclusively with business authors. I've worked with authors who are coaches, consultants, mentors, speakers, some high-ticket salespeople, C-level executives, and of course, business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. They want to write a book, and they want that book to help them expand their business. See, with a book in hand, they're able to market their expertise, or secure more speaking gigs, or promote their company, or all three, or maybe even more than that. They're not out to write a bestseller, though that would be nice. Instead, they have years of knowledge and experience, and sorting it out will be no easy task. More importantly, they want all that knowledge and experience to be an engaging read. To learn more about how you can become an author, visit weckerlywriter.com. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com, and schedule a consultation today. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast. So then, of course, setting up a healthcare business for the vast majority of Americans, they're not in this industry. I mean, they're involved in it. Of course, they have to get their medicine somehow. But for those who actually want to go into it, either going into med school, coming out of med school, or thinking of going into their own private practice, they understand the medical part. Obviously, they're trained. They're not
Right.
that guy in the hot shots who's like, well, I don't know, I'm not a very good doctor. They're ready to go out on their own. From your standpoint, Brian, and you've obviously got years of experience here helping these physicians and these healthcare specialists plan their own practices. From your position, where do they need to start?
Well, I mean, they need to have some understanding and semblance. In fact, I've developed a training for operations, particularly for medical, for physicians and mid-levels and things like that, to give them that understanding of baseline operations, certain, key performance indicators and things that they should know and be cognizant of, so that they can gauge whether they have a healthy practice, or not. Because so many of them, they have no idea whether they're financially viable or not. They wait till their CPA does taxes at the beginning of the next year to tell them, like, hey, you made money, or hey, you didn't do so good.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, is there a simple list, or I guess a couple goals that you've set up that would help them at least, have the right mindset going into it?
I mean, I would say as a general rule, kind of leaning into some of the stuff that we had discussed before, they really need to, when it comes down to cost and production values, if they just take their top 25 codes for whatever specialty or subspecialty they may be, and they understand the reimbursement values behind there. So per their insurance contract with these carriers, they're going to get a reimbursement value of doing this for a new patient visit or whatever it may be. Knowing those values is going to be a critical exercise for them to do and for them to be aware of, so that they can at least generally gauge what their income is looking at a schedule. So looking at an AM and PM schedule, they can kind of derive like, okay, I have an expectation of around, $2,500 in my AM schedule for reimbursement. And that is true dollars in the door, like per the contract, and you can get very, very specific and know exactly what that number is down to the penny. But I mean, just if they're aware of it as a general rule, I think that's hugely important, particularly for their top 5 payers, or insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then secondarily, they have to have some awareness of their cost and their true costs for operating. So their salaries, if they have a mid-level provider, nurse practitioner, a PA, what that salary is incorporated in, the day-to-day, their utilities, their supplies, their, other personnel, medical assistants, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
All these operational numbers, need to go and be added into their cost. Malpractice insurance. I mean, the list goes on and on. But as you add those up, and then you obviously can subtract those from their income, if you have a viable schedule and a viable business, right?
Mm-hmm. And so with those numbers in mind, can they adjust? Can they say, well, okay, we're not getting these kind of appointments. Should they maybe try and go out and get more of those kind of appointments? Or is there, I guess, another way of thinking about it? Am I thinking about it the wrong way?
No, not at all. I mean, yeah, they can certainly adjust. I mean, obviously you want to build a general schedule to accommodate the patient base. Because I mean, ultimately that's what you are in that line of work for. You want to take care of people. So your schedule first and foremost has to be accommodating to patients. It's just the right thing to do. So these guys, I've seen others that do it the wrong way, and that would completely mock up schedules, for financial reward. And, for me, I think you can have the best of both worlds, and you can have financial viability in a schedule, without having it be a detriment to the patient and servicing the patient. So yeah, I certainly think that as a practitioner, they can look at a schedule, or if they're, in medical operations or what have you, they can certainly look at patient schedules and say, well, we should be really trying to achieve getting in, 5-6 new patients a day, per day per provider. That will yield us X amount. And then, our established patients, we're going to have a number of these urgent care or, common visits coming in, based on actuals. Or if they're a startup, then they need to just do a little bit of research. At that point, it's going to obviously skew the numbers, because you're going to have much more availability to see new patients, which typically takes a lot longer. But the reimbursement is obviously higher. So, depending on where they are in practice, it's certainly, and, I would definitely tell them, it's important to really know what your schedule is and the viability of your schedule, both operationally and obviously financially, because you want to have a viable business, for many years, so you're not wind up selling your practice.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of sounds like a Moneyball. Where in the movie, in the book, it's a much more drawn out process, but they do it in a very dramatic style in the movie, where Jonah Hill is pointing out, we need to win this many games, and to win this many games we need to have this many runs, and we can only allow this many runs from our opponents, which will get us this many wins, which will get us to the postseason. So it sounds like you could really kind of math it out.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And I would say that, even citing that it's very applicable regardless. And that, that just, further adds more credence to, the idea that all of these businesses and things, because baseball certainly is a business, that they are very similar. If you're paying attention to the right things, runs versus patients in the door versus, consumers, you're really all talking about the same thing. Operations, they're paying their players. They have all these contracts. It's all the same stuff.
Definitely. And it was very entertaining to read it, and then of course see it in the movie, pointing out how there was just such a huge disconnect in this industry, and they're paying players millions and millions of dollars, and yet it was a bad investment. And at one point, and this was in the book, at one point, a guy points out, every year we sign something like 55 new players, from our amateur roster. And if 2 of them make it to the big leagues, we call that a successful year. In any other business, you would be out of business so fast with that mentality, and yet it's common practice. And there's millions of dollars just going out the window, and nobody thinks twice of it. And I'm like, if that's the accepted mode of thinking in baseball, where is that accepted elsewhere? And I kind of want to look around, but I don't want to look too deeply. It's like, okay, if I look into this industry, what am I going to find? And will it be like, pulling back the curtain and realizing, oh my gosh, this is all been running with duct tape and bubble gum. So is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
No, I mean, I think, that's really it. I think, without worrying even about specifics of an organization, but particularly healthcare organizations, as long as they're, managing their overhead, and actively managing at that, and looking for ways to, add ancillary services and increase their revenues. I mean, they're ultimately going to have a good practice. And then secondarily, I mean, doing the better exercises depending on the size of the organization. So whether they're small or big, they should know their cost versus their production values. Because again, if they're paying attention to those two things, they will be on top of being able to operationally and financially manage their practice much better.
Cool. So if a healthcare executive or physician is listening to this right now and they're like, okay, it sounds like Brian is the person who I need to talk to get a handle on my practice so I don't lose it, where can they find you?
Well, they can certainly go to the website, www.omegastrategicconsulting.com, and they can schedule a free strategy call there. Or they can just reach out to me directly on my mobile phone if they'd like at 210-382-0138.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, Brian, for stopping by, and I'll try to get you back on the show as soon as I can.
Absolutely. Sounds great. I really look forward to it.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges Podcast. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com to listen to more episodes and subscribe. And don't forget to schedule a consultation to talk about your book today by visiting weckerlywriter.com. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com.